The New York Giants made some big improvements this offseason, but have they caught up to the Cowboys? We'll discuss that and more next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Landon McCool is actually out the rest of the week. He's on a much needed vacation, but that's okay because I have the great Patricia Traina here from Locked On Giants. You can follow her on Twitter at Patricia_Traina. And over the next couple of days, we're going to check in with the Cowboys division rivals. And we're starting with, obviously, the Giants today. Kind of talking about where they stand going into training camp. And Patricia, but we're going to get to the quarterbacks. Don't worry. We'll get there in 1 second. But what are the vibes like around the Giants this offseason and going into camp?
Yeah, the vibes are as positive as I can recall them being in this Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll era. I mean, this is a roster that, we don't know what the final roster is going to look like, but in terms of the competition and the depth that Joe Schoen has built up, I don't ever recall it being like this. So there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of optimism. Joe Schoen really in the offseason attacked every single area where this team was weakest last year, offensive line depth, pass rush, the defensive secondary, quarterback. He added a lot of competition. And so this is going to be probably one of the most competitive camps that we have seen under the Daboll Schoen era.
So, all right. 10,000 foot view. When the schedule came out, I looked at the Giants' first 8 games or so of the season, and I thought, this could be like a 2-6 football team, 1-7. I'll read them to you for the Locked On Cowboy listeners that maybe don't know. They opened the season at Washington and then at Dallas. First game of the year, home against the Chiefs. Then they play the Chargers, Saints, Eagles, Broncos, Eagles, 49ers, Bears, Packers, Lions. Like, this is a ridiculous schedule to open up the year. Has that kind of entered your mind at all that, hey, this might be a better team on paper, but we can see them get off to a really slow start, and who knows after that?
Well, that's the common, I guess, narrative about the schedule. But, look, the schedule is what it is. And on my show, I actually did a segment on this. And I pointed out that, teams change every year. I mean,
Sure.
We don't see the same team every year. And I alluded to before the Giants adding more talent. But, there was some great stats that I came across via True Media and NFL research. 4 out of the 5 past teams who had easy strengths of schedules missed the postseason. Okay. And on the flip side, you had 2 teams, the 23 Eagles, the 21 Steelers, who had the toughest strength of schedules, but who made the playoffs. And for Giant fans who might be watching this program, at least one team, has won the division after missing the playoffs in 53 of the last 55 seasons since the NFL-AFL merger. So yes, folks, there is hope.
All right, Patricia, let's talk about the quarterback situation. I think a lot of Cowboy fans believe that it'll be Russell Wilson on the field in week 2 when these two teams match up. But how quickly do you think we'll see Jackson Dart on the field as a starter this year?
I would say probably not until late in the season. It obviously there's a bunch of factors that are going to go into it. What's the record? What's the injury situation? But more importantly, when is Jackson Dart going to be ready? Now you look at the league history. Patrick Mahomes sat for a little bit. Jordan Love sat for a little bit. Going back years ago, Eli Manning sat. So the Giants, they double insulated at that quarterback position. And by that, I mean, they added 2 veterans who they feel can go out and win them some games, and Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, so that they're not in a situation like Schoen and Daboll were in Buffalo when they kind of had to push Josh Allen out there maybe a little earlier than they wanted to. So I would not be stunned if Jackson Dart sits the entire year. You might see him maybe in a mop-up role if he does well enough to where maybe he jumps ahead of Jameis Winston as the quarterback too. But I would be very surprised if we see him as a starter unless there's a rash of injuries.
What about the rest of the offense? How are you feeling about the offensive line, the receivers? Because this has been one of the worst offenses in the league over the last couple of years. I'm not trying to, down the Giants or anything. I'm just kind of telling the truth. Do you think this unit's going to be much improved in 2025?
Well, it's interesting because other than the quarterback, they really didn't change anything on the offensive line or the running backs or the other skill position players, which I found pretty interesting, which tells me that they feel that the quarterback was the problem. Now, you go back to last season when they finally got some good quarterback play in the game against the Colts, and they just absolutely exploded on offense. And, if you're Brian Dable and you're trying to justify keeping your job, you go to ownership and you say, see what happens when I have good quarterback play, see what my offense can do. So, I think the jury's still out. I mean, receivers, you've got Malik Neighbors, who was just absolutely, stellar last year as a rookie. Tyrone Tracy is probably going to be RB1, followed by Devin Singletary to start the season. And then I think in time, Cam Scatterboo, who's a rookie, he might, pass him on the depth chart. The offensive line, though, is the question mark, in my opinion, because, can they get Andrew Thomas on the field and keep him on the field? If they can't, they're in trouble. And what about the interior of that offensive line? Who are going to be the guards? Right now, the incumbents are John Runyon Jr. and Greg Van Roten, but they're also trying to cross-train Evan Neal, who, by the way, is a very good run blocker. But, is he going to be ready? So that's kind of still, I think, up in the air.
And this is where, if you're a Cowboy fan, I think you're catching the Giants early in the season. Is probably a good time, right? New quarterback, Russell Wilson will only be in to start number 2. It's an offensive line that's, they've had a lot of injuries. We'll see what it looks like early in the year. Malik Neighbors is a superstar, and that's going to be the Cowboys' biggest concern is, can they cover Malik Neighbors? They didn't do a particularly good job of it in their first meeting last year, but I think there are things on that side of the ball where the Cowboys feel like they probably should have an advantage. But from like a 10,000-foot view, Patricia, you see the building blocks here, right? Like you have a superstar receiver in Malik Neighbors, who I don't even believe is 22 years old yet. You have a franchise left tackle. You've got other weapons in the offense that can help, whether it's Tyrone Tracy. I like Darius Slayton quite a bit. Wan'Dale Robinson could be more effective. Like they have the pieces in place. It's just, can they figure out that quarterback situation? We know it's not going to be Russell Wilson long-term. It's not going to be Jameis Winston. So it feels like the Giants are going to have a hard time getting out of the bottom of the NFC East until they can even get passable quarterback play. And who knows if they'll get that this year or anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair to say because, again, the fact that they didn't change any other position except for quarterback kind of tells you how they feel about what happened the last year. So the question is can Jackson Dart be that guy? Now, in the springtime, Jackson Dart had more good days than bad days, but we have to put the asterisk there. And we have to say that there was no pass rush. He wasn't hit. The speed wasn't like what you would
Which we could say this for all quarterbacks in the offseason.
Exactly.
It's not just Dart. Yes.
Exactly. So, the point being is he looked promising, but, you can't just say, okay, let's put him in the Hall of Fame now because he looked good in the spring.
All right, let's talk about the Giants defensive line. And one of the reasons that I think the Cowboys use the number 12 overall pick on a guard is because of that nose tackle in New York, who we're going to talk about next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it just a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are out getting sunburned at the beach. I love FanDuel. I use it just about every single day. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. And now is the perfect time to sign up. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are here with Patricia Traina from Locked On Giants to discuss the Giants going into training camp in the preseason. And Patricia, I want to talk about the defensive line because the Giants spent the number 3 overall pick on Abdul Carter. They signed Brian Burns to a massive contract last year after trading for him from the Panthers. They drafted Kayvon Thibodeau inside of the top 5 picks just a couple years ago. They signed my guy Chauncey Golston. Plus, they have Dexter Lawrence. And please, 1 second. I love Dexter Lawrence. He might be my favorite non-Cowboy in the league. Every time that you and I jump on a call, I gush about Dexter Lawrence.
Sexy,
and,
Dexy.
He's so good. Little spoiler, in the top 100 that gets released later on Wednesday, I put him inside my top 10 players. I mean, he is an animal. I'm so jealous that the Giants have him. Do you think this could be one of the best defensive lines in the league this season?
I think if everybody stays healthy, yes. Now, the question is how are they going to get them all on the field at the same time? Can you imagine trying to pick your poison if you're an opposing offense? Do you double up Dexter? Do you double up,
Yes,
Thibodeau? Is it Burns, Carter? And let me tell you, I'm sure you're going to ask me about Carter, but that kid is so fast off the snap. He reminds me a lot of O.C. Umenyiora with that fast step, that first step. OC used to come right off the line, and before an offensive lineman could even get up and set up the pass block, OC was often right by him. Abdul Carter is faster, if you can believe that. So for those of you who remember OC Umenyiora and how quick he was off the snap, Carter, from what we saw in the spring, faster.
So I believe this is one of the big reasons why the Cowboys drafted Tyler Booker in round 1 this year, is not because of Abdul Carter. He's going to play on the edge, but they needed to be bigger and badder in the interior of the offensive line to deal with Dexter Lawrence. And I think they wanted to be able to give their tackles more help because they're going to be dealing with guys like Abdul Carter and Brian Burns. And then if you go over to the Eagles, Nolan Smith, and just guys that have some speed. So you better be able to hold up inside, give your quarterback some protection. And we know in the NFC East, it's littered with pass rushers with Dexter Lawrence and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Deron Payne. Like the list goes on and on. So I do think the Giants defensive line played a big factor in what the Cowboys did in the draft this year, because I think they have a chance to be that dominant.
Yeah. I mean, look, the pass rush kind of been a weak spot for the Giants. I mean, last year a little bit better, but not elite. And when you have a young secondary like what the Giants have, despite the additions they made with Paulson Adebo at cornerback, with Javon Holland at safety, you've got to protect that group. All right. This is a group that last year struggled in a zone heavy defensive scheme. So now you've got a pass rush that hopefully is going to force quarterbacks to throw a little bit earlier than they want to, or throw off balance. And maybe there's going to be more interceptions in the future of this Giants defense, because that was a very rare stat for the team to achieve last year. And it's something obviously they need to address.
All right. So from a Cowboy perspective, the defensive line is the concern, right? That's going to be an awesome unit, assuming those guys all stay healthy. But one of the reasons that Dak Prescott, really any Cowboy quarterback over the last couple of years, has had success is because CeeDee Lamb and the receivers have been able to get open at will against the secondary. How do you feel about this Giants secondary going into camp and going into preseason?
I would say my jury's still out on this secondary. I mean, I do like the addition of Adebo. I think in Adebo, they have a guy who is who can play more of that zone heavy coverage scheme that the Giants run. I don't know quite what to expect from Deonte Banks. And it's interesting because in the spring, he was actually splitting first team reps with Cordell Flott, which, was kind of a surprise. So I think it's going to be Banks. And, the coaches and his teammates have spoken about how locked in he's been and whatnot. But what do you expect them to say? You think anybody's going to say, oh, he's been, he hasn't been good? So obviously we'll see how he looks in the summer. But I would say there's probably a question there. At safety, I think Tyler Nubin and Javon Holland are going to be pretty good. I'd like to see Javon Holland maybe do a little bit more blitzing. He's good at it. He's
Yeah.
good at it. Not Kyle Hamilton good, but he can get it done. When he did it in his rookie season in Brian Flores' defense, he was actually very effective. So I'd like to see that, how they deploy those safeties. And then, of course, you've got Drew Phillips, the slot cornerback, who probably had the best season out of, all the defensive backs. So Drew Phillips, I think, is going to be even better. And he'll probably be the one that sees a CD Lamb a lot in that slot.
And that's why I'm glad that you brought him up, because one of the reasons, or one of the ways that the Cowboys have exploited the Giants is just by putting CD Lamb in the slot, and they just haven't had that guy that can come up and match up with him. And I don't know if Drew Phillips is that guy. I think he's very good near the line of scrimmage. He's a blitzer. He's a really good tackler. Asking him to cover CD Lamb one-on-one is going to be incredibly tough, but I don't think he played the second matchup, and it was a big deal that he wasn't on the field. I think what I'm more interested in now is, let's say it is CD versus Drew Phillips in the slot. How do they cover George Pickens on the outside? Do they leave Banks one-on-one? Is it a Debo one-on-one? Do they give him more safety help? Who knows? But this is a defense. If they can figure out the back end, I think the pass rush is going to be so good. This should be an improved defense. I know a lot of times your defense is a weak link unit, right? If you have a couple players that are struggling, those guys can kind of get exposed. But I do think this is one of the deeper defenses we've seen from the Giants, at least over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think the big question, to your point about how they're going to cover George Pickens, and this is kind of interesting, is Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, going to have Paulson Adebo travel? In the past, I think Adebo has primarily played, I want to say, is it the left side? I think it's either, I forget which side it is, but he's primarily played on one side, as has Banks. So now, are they going to have them travel with the number one receiver? Or are they going to have them play sides? How are they going to approach it? That's going to be very telling, and something to keep an eye on what they do in Washington the first game. And then that might give us a clue to how they play it when they meet Dallas for that first matchup in week 2.
Yeah, we're going to find out how good this Giants defense is right away between Washington and Dallas. 2 very different styles of offense, but 2 offenses that I think a lot of people expect to be top 8, top 10 units. It's going to be fascinating to see. All right, Patricia, let's talk about some young players that we are excited to watch as we get closer to week 1, and a couple of names that you should keep an eye on. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. The Locked On NFL Top 100 will be released on Wednesday. That's today, July 16th at 10 a.m. Eastern, depending on when you're listening to this. It could already be out on the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The NFL Top 100 was voted on by the NFL hosts of Locked On, and there's some true stunners on the list. I did my best. I took about 2.5 hours out of my day going through the list, making sure I felt really, really good about it. So make sure you check it out. Spoiler, Dexter Lawrence is very high up there for me. Don't miss where your favorite players were ranked. Subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Patricia, let's talk about some young players to keep an eye on. We talked about some big names, obviously. Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Malik Neighbors, who are a couple guys that maybe Cowboy fans don't know that they should.
Under the radar guys, want to keep an eye on Darius Alexander, the 3rd round pick. I think that's the guy who they want to work into that defensive line rotation eventually, next to Big Dex, Sexy Dexy. Versatile guy, can play up and down the defensive line. So that's somebody certainly to keep an eye on.
Can I real quick on Darius Alexander? I heard that the Cowboys were very interested in Alexander. And if Donovan Ezeraku, their 2nd round edge, wasn't on the board, he would have been a likely pick. So it's going to be fascinating to see how those 2 guys pan out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hopefully Darius Alexander, he missed most of the spring. So I don't know what he had, but hopefully he'll be ready to go when they start up training camp. So Alexander would be one. I think on offense, I mean, a fan favorite who's developing is Cam Scatteraboo, who I call a human bowling ball. I mean, he is compact and he is thick in the body. He's going to knock some people down. So if you've got a smallish defense, he's going to probably try and run you over. They haven't had that thunder and lightning duo in I don't know how long. I want to go back to say Brandon Jacobs, maybe
Ahmad Bradshaw.
Ahmad Bradshaw, exactly. So that's going to be exciting because, now they've got another dimension to that running game.
I got one I want to ask you about because we know about Neighbors. We know that Wandale is going to play in the slot. Darius Slayton is going to be the outside receiver. Theo Johnson is an incredible athlete coming out of Penn State. I mean, he's all of 6'6", 265 pounds. The rookie season wasn't great, but you're also betting on the potential. Do you think we see him in a bigger role in year 2?
Oh, I think so. I think last year they kind of threw a lot at the kid, kind of just threw him into the deep end. So, yeah, I think as the season went on, before he suffered that season-ending foot injury, he got better. So he's healthy. He was able to go through the spring. Huge body, big body kid.
Massive.
Does a great job of shielding the ball. But the blocking is still a work in progress, but he's got the tools to do it. And I'm looking forward to seeing him go up the seam, because the Giants really haven't had a tight end that could do that in quite some time and just knock people over. And, hey, good luck trying to slow that kid down. Good luck trying to beat him on the contested catches as well, because you get that ball within his area code, he's going to probably come down with it.
Another player that I wanted to ask you about is Jalen Hyatt, who's going into year 3. I'm sure you remember that famous video that came out. I think it was right after the draft with the Cowboys wide receiver coach really getting on Hyatt about his route running. I know the production has not been there the last couple of years, but going into year 3, what do you expect from him?
I hope for his sake he gets more of an opportunity. Now, the last couple of years, there's been, some question about, does he run the proper routes? Does he track the ball when it's in the air? He's looked good in practice, but, there are players that look good in practice, and then once you put them out on the field, they don't look the same. And I think he was probably one of those players. Now, to his credit, he did bulk up because, look, his frame was also a problem. He wasn't really able to block downfield, which is part of the job of a receiver, but he's bulked up. He hasn't lost any speed, and he really worked at it. Now, unfortunately for him, he suffered some sort of injury, I want to say a hamstring. It was to his left leg on the first day of the team's mini camp. So is he going to be okay to go? I don't know the answer to that, but they are looking to, find somebody who can play on the outside, take some of the onus off of Malik Neighbors. And, look, the Giants flirted a little bit with Gabe Davis, who Brian Dable and Joe Shea know from their days in Buffalo. Jalen Hyatt is going to try and convince them that, hey, you don't need Gabe Davis. I'm your guy.
Yeah, and it's going to be hard for him to get snaps because I think the top 3 receivers are so established in New York. Can he be that guy that's the 4th receiver and rotating in? We'll see. It's a big year for him because I honestly, Patricia, I could see a couple different things happening. I could see him putting it all together, becoming a force on the outside. But if it doesn't happen, your wide receiver 4 needs to be able to block, and they need to be able to play some special teams. And he really doesn't do either. And now you're talking about somebody who might be a healthy scratch every single week. It's just a huge offseason and an opportunity for Hyatt to show that he belongs.
Yeah, it definitely is. But you know what? Again, to his credit, he has put in the work. I know for a fact he's done some work, outside of the practices. He's locked in and focused. He was frustrated last year. Everybody was frustrated last year, but he more so because, the opportunities weren't coming. And when they did come, he wasn't really able to show what he could do. So I think this year is going to be a very big, big year for him.
Last thing before we go, over on FanDuel.com right now, the Giants win total is set at 5.5. Let's say that it's at that number. Let's say they win 6 games this year. I mean, maybe you think they win more, but let's say it's 6-7 games. Do you think the duo of Joe Shane and Brian Dable are back in 2026?
I think so. As long as there's progress, as long as you see week over week progress. If the locker room falls apart, then I think Dable's in trouble. If the injuries hit the team like it has the last few years, how can you really blame that on Shane if he gave you what you need? I do think they're going to be safe, and I also think because they took Jackson Dart, they don't want to make the mistake of, okay, let's now have revolving head coaches come in here, new systems, and screw with this kid's head. That's kind of what they did with Daniel Jones. And part of the reason I believe Daniel Jones didn't work out for them.
Do you think there's a scenario where they win like 5 games, but Jackson Dart shows enough over the last month and a half of the season that he kind of saves the job of Dable and Shane? Because I could see that scenario playing out as well. The schedule gets a little softer as the year goes on. If Dart shows just enough, maybe they give both guys another year.
Yeah, I think so. I would be very surprised. I think it would have to take something catastrophic for Shane and Dable to get fired after this year. I mean, if they go winless, then I think you got to look at.
Well, yeah, if they go winless, they're not coming back. We're going to break some news right now.
But I think, again, as long as there's progress week after week, I don't think anybody's expecting them to go to the Super Bowl this year. I know I am not. And I'm generally, very optimistic, but you want to see progress and you want to have that continuity, because it seems, at least on paper, and I know paper doesn't count for anything, but it seems like they're finally going in the right direction with the roster.
Last thing, do they beat out the Cowboys this year? Do they finish higher than the Cowboys in the NFC East?
I don't know. I will say this. I think it's possible that they split the series with the Cowboys. How about that?
There you go. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Make sure you download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. We want to thank Patricia for jumping on the show. Make sure you follow her on Twitter at Patricia_Traina. Check out the Locked On Giants podcast. She does absolutely fantastic work over there. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.